Imagine this for a moment, right now while you are watching this video, while you are sitting exactly where you are, while your mind is full of questions that nobody else can hear and your heart is carrying weight that nobody else can see. Somewhere in this world there is a person whose eyes are closed and whose voice is trembling softly and whose hands are folded tightly, and they are whispering your name to God even though you cannot hear them and even though you may not even know who they are. Because heaven hears prayers long before we ever see their answers, and right now something is shifting in your life, not because of what you did today but because someone else refused to stop praying for you yesterday and the day before that and the day before that, and what you are feeling lately is not random, and what you are walking through lately is not meaningless, and what you thought was just another ordinary difficult season is actually the quiet evidence that someone somewhere has been standing in the gap for you, asking God to protect you, asking God to guide you, asking God to heal you, asking God to open doors you cannot open and close doors you cannot see coming. And the reason this message found you today is because heaven wants you to understand something that changes everything about how you see your situation, because you are not alone in your battle, even when you feel alone in your room, even when you feel alone in your decisions, even when you feel alone in your confusion. Even when nobody around you understands the pressure you are under, there is someone whose faith has been carrying your name into the presence of God. And sometimes the miracle in your life does not begin when you pray, but begins when someone else refuses to stop praying for you. And maybe that explains why certain disasters never touched you, even though they were close enough to change your story forever. And maybe that explains why certain opportunities appeared exactly when you were about to give up, and maybe that explains why certain people suddenly walked into your life at the perfect moment when your strength was almost gone, because there are prayers moving around you right now that you never asked for but heaven answered anyway, and there are blessings forming around your future that you never expected but God prepared anyway, and there are protections surrounding your path that you never noticed but someone asked for anyway, and what you thought was coincidence was actually coverage, and what you thought was luck was actually intercession, and what you thought was timing was actually someone kneeling somewhere believing that God was still writing something beautiful into your story even when you could not see it yet, because prayer travels farther than distance, and prayer moves faster than fear, and prayer works deeper than doubt, and prayer reaches places in your life that even your own words cannot reach. And there are moments in life when everything begins changing. Not because your circumstances suddenly improve, but because someone else's faith refuses to let your story end where your pain expected it to end. And right now, whether you realize it or not, your life is standing inside the answer to somebody else's prayer, and that means what you are facing today is not the end of your story but the middle of a miracle that has already begun moving toward you even before you understood what was happening. And maybe recently you have felt something difficult to explain. Maybe you felt protection when things should have fallen apart. Maybe you felt peace when anxiety should have taken over. Maybe you felt strength when exhaustion should have won. Maybe you felt hope when nothing around you made sense. And that is not your imagination, and that is not emotional coincidence, and that is not random timing. That is evidence that heaven is responding to words spoken on your behalf by someone who loves you enough to keep believing for you when you could not believe for yourself. And sometimes those prayers come from people you expect, like parents or friends or mentors or someone who once crossed your path and never stopped caring about your future. But sometimes those prayers come from people you do not even know yet, because God places intercessors in positions around your life before you ever realize why they are there. And sometimes the reason you survived what should have broken you is because someone else saw your struggle before you ever told them about it, and they carried your name into prayer before you even realized how much you needed it. And sometimes the reason you are still standing today is not because you were strong enough, but because someone else was faithful enough to keep asking God not to let your story end in defeat. And what is happening right now in your life is not ordinary, and what is unfolding around your future is not accidental, and what you are feeling inside your spirit is not meaningless, because when someone prays for you, heaven begins rearranging things you cannot see yet, and doors begin shifting before you reach them, and conversations begin forming before they happen, and protection begins surrounding situations before they even start, and answers begin traveling toward you before you even know what questions to ask. And that means something powerful is already moving in your direction, even if everything around you still looks the same. And maybe you have been wondering lately why certain delays happened, or why certain plans changed, or why certain relationships faded, or why certain paths closed unexpectedly. But what if those moments were not rejection but redirection? And what if those pauses were not punishment but preparation? And what if those closed doors were actually answers to prayers spoken over your life by someone who could see danger ahead that you could not see yet? Because sometimes God answers prayers for you by protecting you from opportunities that looked right but were wrong. And sometimes God answers prayers for you by slowing you down when you wanted to move faster. And sometimes God answers prayers for you by removing people who were never meant to stay in your future, even though you thought they were permanent in your present. And right now there are things happening behind the scenes of your life that you cannot measure yet, and cannot explain yet, and cannot fully understand yet, but heaven is working through conversations you cannot hear, and timing you cannot control, and alignments you cannot predict. And the reason your story is still moving forward is because somebody somewhere believed you were worth praying for, even when you did not believe you were worth fighting for yourself. And that kind of prayer changes atmospheres, and that kind of prayer changes direction, and that kind of prayer changes outcomes. And sometimes the breakthrough in your life begins in somebody else's prayer room long before it reaches your front door. And right now something is already shifting in your favor, even if your situation still looks the same, because prayer does not always change circumstances immediately, but it always begins changing outcomes permanently. And the moment someone begins praying for you, something begins rearranging around you, whether you notice it or not, and whether you understand it or not, and whether you feel ready for it or not. And what you are walking into next is not random timing, but answered prayer that started before this season even began. There are moments in your life when nothing around you seems to make sense anymore, when doors that once looked wide open suddenly close without warning, when people you trusted begin to grow distant, when opportunities disappear at the last second, when answers never arrive no matter how hard you pray. And during those silent, confusing seasons you start wondering if heaven has forgotten your name. But what you cannot see right now is that somewhere someone has already whispered your name before God, and their prayer is moving through places you cannot reach with your own strength. And even though you feel stuck, something in the unseen realm has already started shifting on your behalf, because prayer has a way of traveling farther than fear ever could, and reaching deeper than doubt ever will. And while you are sitting there trying to understand what is happening in your life, there is someone asking God to protect you from what you never even knew was coming. Someone asking God to open doors for you that no human connection could open. Someone asking God to bring peace into your heart before anxiety turns into surrender. And that prayer is not random, because God does not allow people to pray for you by accident. He places your name in someone's spirit for a reason, and when He does, it means movement has already begun behind the scenes, even before you see the first sign of change. Sometimes the prayer being spoken over your life right now is not loud and dramatic but quiet and persistent, like a whisper carried through heaven's corridors, and those quiet prayers are often the most powerful because they come from people who truly care about your destiny, even when they cannot fully explain why they feel connected to your journey. And maybe that person is a parent who never stopped believing in you even when you lost belief in yourself, or maybe it is a friend who still mentions your name when they talk to God even though you have not spoken in a long time, or maybe it is someone you have never even met yet, someone who simply felt led to pray for a stranger without realizing they were praying directly into your future. And what makes this moment so powerful is that you may feel alone, but heaven knows you are not walking this season by yourself, because prayer creates invisible bridges between people and purpose. And those bridges are carrying help toward you even right now. There are things being blocked from reaching you at this very moment because someone asked God to stand between you and what was never meant to touch your life. And sometimes protection does not look like progress at first, because protection often feels like delay and rejection and confusion, but later you will realize that what looked like disappointment was actually divine intervention working quietly behind the scenes to keep your path aligned with something greater than what you originally planned for yourself. And while you were questioning why things were not working out the way you expected, someone else was asking God to make sure only the right things reached your future and only the right people remained connected to your story. You may not realize it yet, but there are decisions you almost made that would have taken you in the wrong direction, and there were relationships you almost trusted that would have drained your strength, and there were opportunities that looked perfect on the outside but would have slowly pulled you away from your calling, and somehow those things slipped out of your hands before they could settle into your life, and you thought it was loss, but it was actually protection, because someone somewhere asked God to guard your steps even when you were too tired to keep asking for guidance yourself. And that kind of prayer changes timelines in ways you cannot measure with your eyes. There is also something else happening right now that you may not have noticed, because while someone is praying for your protection, they are also praying for your preparation, and preparation seasons are never comfortable because they reshape how you think, how you respond, how you trust, and how you move forward after disappointment. And even though preparation feels slow, it is actually one of the most important stages of your journey, because God never sends you into your next chapter without strengthening the parts of you that will be needed to survive inside the blessing that is coming. And sometimes the reason things feel quiet is because growth is happening beneath the surface where nobody else can see it yet. And while all of this is unfolding, there is another layer of prayer surrounding your life that is working on restoring things you thought were permanently broken, because restoration rarely happens in a single moment but through a process that starts with someone believing again on your behalf before you are ready to believe again for yourself. And those kinds of prayers begin repairing confidence, healing memories, and reopening possibilities that once felt closed forever. And even though restoration takes time, it never begins without someone first asking heaven to move in your direction. What makes this moment even more powerful is that sometimes the person praying for you does not even know the details of what you are facing right now, but they feel something in their spirit telling them not to stop mentioning your name in their prayers. And when that happens, it means God is already working in places you cannot reach yet, because He often starts preparing solutions long before problems fully appear in your life. And by the time you finally understand what He protected you from, you will realize that prayer was already standing in front of you before the difficulty ever arrived. There are also times when the prayer covering your life right now is preparing you for connections you have not met yet, because the right people do not arrive randomly. They arrive when timing and purpose finally meet in the same place, and someone somewhere is already asking God to align your steps with the people who will understand your calling, support your growth, and recognize your value without you needing to explain yourself over and over again. And those prayers are quietly arranging future conversations, future opportunities, and future friendships that will make sense of the confusion you are walking through today. So even if today feels uncertain, even if answers are taking longer than expected, even if progress feels invisible, do not assume that nothing is happening, because prayer is still moving and change is still forming and protection is still surrounding your path, and somewhere right now your name is being spoken with faith, hope, and expectation before God, and that means your story is still moving forward even when you cannot see the next page yet. And what you don't realize yet is that while you were quietly wondering if heaven had forgotten your name, God was actually allowing someone to carry your name into places you cannot see, into prayers you did not ask for, into moments of surrender that are moving things behind the curtain of your life right now, because sometimes the greatest shifts don't happen through what you say but through what someone else whispers to God on your behalf when you are too tired to speak, too confused to understand, and too wounded to believe that anything is still changing for you. And that hidden prayer is not small, it is not weak, it is not accidental. It is powerful enough to open doors that logic said were closed forever, and strong enough to stop dangers you never even noticed were coming toward you. Because when someone prays for you with a sincere heart, God listens differently, He moves differently, He protects differently, and He begins aligning moments, conversations, opportunities, and divine connections that will eventually make sense to you, even if right now everything still feels uncertain and delayed. In quiet, folded hands, there are nights when you thought nothing was happening, but those were the exact nights heaven was responding the loudest to prayers spoken for you in secret, because God often works in silence before He works in visibility. And while you were measuring your life by what you could see, God was measuring your future by what someone else was faithfully believing for you, which means the delay you're feeling is not emptiness but preparation, not rejection but positioning, not absence but protection, and that unseen covering over your life is the reason certain wrong doors never opened, certain wrong relationships never stayed, certain wrong opportunities never succeeded, even though at the time they looked perfect. Because sometimes God answers another person's prayer for you before He answers your own, and you don't recognize it until later, when everything suddenly begins to make sense in a way that feels too precise to be coincidence and too intentional to be luck. Sparkles, right now there is movement around your life that you cannot measure with your eyes, but you can feel it in your spirit, that quiet shift where something inside you is becoming calmer even though your circumstances haven't fully changed yet. And that peace is not random, because it is often the first sign that heaven has already started working on your situation through the voice of someone who refused to stop believing in your breakthrough even when you almost stopped believing yourself. And what makes this moment powerful is that their prayer is not only asking God to bless you but asking Him to restore your strength, protect your purpose, heal your past disappointments, and guide you toward the exact path that leads to the future He designed for you long before you ever felt lost. Which means you are not walking forward alone, even if it feels that way right now. Because spiritual support is surrounding you in ways that are stronger than what you can physically see. Fire. And the reason this matters more than you think is because when someone consistently prays for your life, God begins preparing you for things you once felt unqualified for, doors you once thought were unreachable, and peace you once believed was impossible, and suddenly the same situations that used to drain you will start strengthening you. The same waiting seasons that used to frustrate you will start shaping you, and the same silence that once confused you will start guiding you, because prayer has a way of changing not only circumstances but perspective, and once your perspective changes, your entire direction begins to change with it, which is why what is happening right now is not ordinary timing but divine alignment quietly unfolding around your life, even while you are still trying to figure out what comes next. And what you don't realize yet is that the prayer being spoken over your life right now is not small, it is not casual, and it is not ordinary, because somewhere at this exact moment someone is standing in faith for you when you felt like giving up on yourself. Someone is asking God to strengthen you when you secretly felt weak. Someone is asking heaven to open doors for you that you didn't even know existed yet. And while you thought your progress was slow and your silence meant nothing was changing, God was already moving pieces in places you cannot see and aligning people you have not met and preparing answers to questions you have not even asked yet, because prayer does not travel through time the way humans understand time but instead reaches into moments ahead of you and begins preparing protection before the danger arrives, favor before the opportunity appears, and strength before the battle even begins. And that is why some things that were meant to break you suddenly passed over you without explanation. That is why certain doors closed even though you begged them to stay open, and that is why certain relationships disappeared even though you tried your best to hold them together, because someone was praying that God would remove what could not stay in your future and protect what needed to remain in your destiny. And even though you felt confused during those seasons, you were never abandoned for a single second, because heaven was responding to a voice calling your name before the throne of God. And right now, while you are listening to this message, there is still movement happening behind the scenes in your favor. There is still protection surrounding situations you cannot control. There is still strength being poured into places inside you that you thought were empty, and there is still restoration quietly forming in areas where you thought loss was permanent. Because prayer does not always change your circumstances immediately, but it always begins changing your direction instantly. And sometimes the reason you are still standing after everything you went through is not because you were strong enough, but because someone refused to stop believing for you when your own faith felt tired. And the reason your story did not end in the chapter where everything looked broken is because heaven was already writing a continuation you could not see yet. And this is the moment where you need to understand that what is happening around you right now is not random and not accidental, but intentional and guided and protected, because God hears every prayer spoken with your name in it, and He responds in ways that are bigger than what human eyes can measure and deeper than what human minds can explain, which means the delay you felt was not rejection but preparation. The silence you experienced was not absence but alignment. And the waiting season you struggled through was actually the space where unseen prayers were building the foundation for the next breakthrough that is already closer to you than you think. Folded hand sparkles, and what is coming into your life next will make sense of the confusion you survived and will reveal that every hidden prayer spoken for you was shaping a future stronger, safer, and more powerful than anything you could have planned on your own. There are moments in your life when everything feels quiet on the outside but heavy on the inside, and during those moments you start wondering why doors are not opening, why people are drifting away, why opportunities seem delayed, why answers are not coming the way you expected. And what you don't realize is that while you are sitting there questioning what is happening, someone somewhere is speaking your name in prayer, and heaven is responding in ways you cannot yet see, because prayer does not always change your situation immediately, but it always begins changing something inside the spiritual atmosphere around your life. And many times before a blessing arrives, there is a battle taking place over you that you never even notice, because God is working through someone else's faith when yours feels weak, and someone right now is standing in the gap for you, even though you may not know their face, even though you may never hear their voice. They are asking God to protect you, strengthen you, guide you, and prepare you for something greater than what you can currently imagine. And that prayer is moving things that logic cannot explain, because prayer travels into places your strength cannot reach. And there are nights when you thought nobody cared about what you were going through, but heaven heard every silent tear you tried to hide, and those tears became the reason someone else suddenly felt led to pray for you without understanding why. They just felt your spirit needed covering, and they obeyed that feeling. And because they obeyed, something started shifting around your future without you even realizing it at first. And this is why some problems that should have destroyed you somehow lost their power before they touched you, because someone was already asking God to block what you never even knew was coming. And sometimes the reason you survived situations that should have broken your confidence, your peace, and your direction was not because you were strong enough on your own, but because someone else refused to stop praying for your protection and your purpose. And right now, even as you are listening to these words, something is quietly aligning behind the scenes, because prayer never returns empty. It always carries purpose, it always carries movement, it always carries timing. And what you thought was delay was actually preparation happening through prayers that were spoken on your behalf long before you understood what you would need strength for. And there are seasons when God allows someone to intercede for you, because He knows you are walking through a chapter where your heart feels tired, your faith feels stretched, and your clarity feels distant. But instead of letting you walk through that season alone, He assigns someone to stand spiritually beside you, even if you never meet them physically. And their prayers become the bridge between where you are now and where God is taking you next. And sometimes the biggest evidence that someone is praying for you is not that everything becomes easy, but that you keep moving forward even when quitting would have been understandable, because unseen prayers create unseen strength, and that strength begins carrying you through days you thought you would not survive, and nights when your mind kept searching for answers that never seemed to come, yet somehow you kept waking up with enough courage to try again. And that courage did not appear by accident, it appeared because heaven responds when someone speaks your name with faith. And right now there is movement happening around opportunities, relationships, protection, and direction in your life that you cannot fully see yet, but you are about to recognize the evidence of it soon, because when someone prays for you consistently, doors begin opening in ways that feel unexpected, and people begin appearing at exactly the right time, and confusion slowly begins turning into clarity, not all at once but step by step, moment by moment, until one day you suddenly realize that the path you thought was blocked was actually being redirected towards something better that required timing you could not control and preparation you could not rush. And that preparation is happening right now, even if it feels invisible today, because someone refused to stop believing that God is still working in your life even when you felt unsure yourself. And their faith is becoming the reason your story is about to shift in ways you never expected, but deeply needed. There are times when you look back at your life and you start noticing moments that should have ended differently, moments where things could have gone wrong, relationships that could have damaged your heart, opportunities that could have disappeared forever, decisions that could have led you in the wrong direction, and yet somehow something stepped in at the exact right time and changed the outcome in ways you still cannot fully explain. And what many people never realize is that those moments are often the fingerprints of someone else's prayer covering your life, because when someone truly prays for you, God begins positioning protection around your steps before you even recognize the danger that was ahead. And sometimes what you thought was rejection was actually divine redirection that came through a prayer spoken for you when you were not even aware you needed help yet. And there are seasons when heaven quietly assigns people to stand spiritually beside you, not because you ask them to, but because your purpose is too important to walk through certain battles alone. And those prayers begin moving ahead of your timeline, clearing paths, removing obstacles, softening hearts, opening doors, and preparing conversations that you never planned but desperately needed. And right now there are conversations that are being prepared for you, doors that are being aligned for you, and opportunities that are being protected for you simply because someone refused to stop praying when your situation looked confusing from the outside. And many times the greatest miracle prayer creates is not something dramatic that everyone can see, but something steady and powerful inside your spirit that keeps you moving forward when everything around you feels uncertain. Because prayer creates endurance, prayer creates clarity, prayer creates protection, and prayer creates connections that arrive at the exact moment your life needs them most. And there are people who suddenly entered your life at unexpected times, not by coincidence but because someone asked God to send the right support, the right encouragement, and the right voices into your journey. And those people became answers to prayers you never even knew were spoken for you. And sometimes the reason certain people quietly disappeared from your life was also connected to prayer, because when someone intercedes for your future, God begins removing what cannot go with you where you are being led next, even when that removal feels confusing at first, because protection does not always feel comfortable in the moment, but later it becomes clear that it saved you from something that would have slowed your purpose or distracted your direction. And right now there is a quiet rearranging happening around your life that is preparing space for something better than what you thought you lost. And even if you cannot see the full picture yet, you are being positioned step by step through prayers that continue working behind the scenes in ways that logic cannot measure and timing cannot interrupt. And what makes this moment powerful is that the prayer being spoken for you right now is not random, it is intentional, it is specific, and it is connected to something God is preparing to release into your life soon. Because before certain blessings arrive, God often moves someone to start praying for you without explanation, as if heaven is announcing that your next chapter is already beginning to form. And even though you may still be standing in a place that feels quiet, uncertain, or delayed, what is happening around you is not silence, it is preparation, it is alignment, it is movement that cannot always be seen but will soon be felt. And when that moment arrives, you will recognize that the strength you gained, the peace you discovered, and the doors that suddenly opened were never accidents. They were the answers to prayers that carried your name into places your own voice could not reach. And those prayers are still working for you right now, even in this very moment, preparing something that is closer than you think and more meaningful than you expected. And soon you will understand why certain paths closed, why certain delays lasted longer than you wanted, and why certain seasons felt slower than they should have, because everything was being arranged through prayers that refused to stop until your life stepped into the direction it was always meant to follow.